August 12th, 2019, the time being 7 p.m. Ms. Iker, will you please take roll call?
Mayor Christy Melendez.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Ken Bennett.
Here.
Miles Baker.
Here.
Barry Wilson.
Here.
Paul Rennemeyer.
Here.
Tom Jones. David Sosowski.
Here.
Mr. Sosowski, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our next item is review of agenda by the board and addition of items of new business to the agenda for consideration.
Madam Mayor, I move that we approve the agenda as presented this evening.
Second.
Motion on the floor from Mr. Rennemeyer with a second from Mayor Pro Tem Bennett approving the agenda as presented. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. And the agenda passes unanimously as presented. Moving on to item 4, board liaison reports. Town Board Member Baker, Tree Board, and Historic Preservation.
Thank you. I have no update since my last meeting.
Town Board Member Wilson, Parks, Recreation, and Culture Advisory Board, Poudre River Trail Corridor.
On Parks, Rec, and Culture, today they presented before this meeting the statistically valid survey that was sent to our citizens. That'll kind of be the roadmap for our strategic plan for our Parks and Rec department. They also, with our citizen advisory board, reviewed the capital operations and staffing budget that will be presented and moved forward eventually to the town board. And then with the Poudre River Trail Corridor, the Party on the Poudre, which is the primary fundraiser for the year, will be September 12th. So mark your calendars for that.
Okay. Town Board Member Bennett, Water and Sewer Board.
Water and Sewer Board met in July. I was absent to give a report, but I did attend that meeting. It was an update of the water supply for our non-potable or non-potable water system. Two things really stood out. One is our water supply for this year is very good. If you've seen the mountains and seen the snowpack, this was above average year. The second thing that stood out, as I recall, is some conversation about storage. We do not have an adequate storage system for Windsor. And what really hit me was that this year in particular, even if NISP and Glade Reservoir were online, because of the late warming of the season and the slower runoff, there may not have been enough excess runoff to even start putting water into Glade Reservoir. So what really stood out from that meeting is that we need to be really conscious of our water efficiency efforts, and also I think we need to continue looking at options for storage of water for those really dry years. They'll be meeting again this week, Wednesday morning, and it'll be a tour of the non-potable water supply system. Now, I'll correct myself, the July meeting was on the total water supply for the year. Okay.
Okay. Town Board Member Rennemeyer, Chamber of Commerce.
Mayor, there's been no meeting since our last, there's been no meeting of the Chamber of Commerce since our last board meeting. But we did have, I was joined last week by Mr. Sosowski and Mr. Baker for a ribbon cutting of the new Colorado Early College's new middle school. It's a beautiful facility, and it was an honor just to be invited to attend. But the event went off without a hitch. It was great to meet all of their leadership, and I would assume that my colleagues that were there as well would concur.
Okay. Town Board Member Sosowski, Clearview Library Board and Planning Commission.
Thank you, Mayor. Planning Commission did meet Wednesday. Two matters before that commission were the conditional use grants that are on our agenda for this evening. And they did pass through Planning Commission and were referred to the board for consideration. The Library Board met on July 25th, and they continued their strategic planning efforts, and we'll be continuing that for the next few weeks. They've possibly maybe extending that, in fact, in order to continue to gather input. They did have a second reading of an amendment to their bylaws, And those amendments primarily were dealing with the expansion of the appointment committee, the group that would be appointing any replacement members on the library board. There will be 2 openings, 2 members are term limited the end of this year. So that appointment committee, which was 4 people, will now include a representative from West Greeley, which is part of the library district. So there will be a 5-member, odd-numbered appointment panel. The amendment also removed the provision that allowed for term limits to be bypassed if there were a capital campaign ongoing. I think the decision was really to respect the term limits that were in their founding documents at the outset. That's all I have.
Okay. I have Downtown Development Authority. Our next meeting is next Wednesday, the 21st at 7:30 in the downstairs chamber. North Front Range MPO did meet on September 5th, but I also did attend the STAC, Statewide Transportation Advisory Committee, on July 26th. So 2 main things that I want to just express is there are 2 important transportation plans and an intake of community information right now. And so one for CDOT, if you want to have your opportunity and your voice heard as to what you think we need to see in terms of transportation in Colorado's future, please go to yourtransportationplan.com and do that survey there for CDOT with regards to transportation issues. There's also another survey out for the Southwest Chief and Front Range Passenger Rail Commission that has commissioned as well a study, and for that one you go to frontrangerail.metroquest.com. So 2 independent surveys and studies happening, both related to transportation. If you want your voice and information heard, you should go to both of those websites prior to the end of September to get to voice your information there. Basically, at our meeting, we did go through a 2018 call for projects and looked at the eligibility and scoring criteria. We have so many new members around the MPO. Many folks don't even know how we get there and the course of what it takes. So we kind of went through exactly all the different pockets of dollars that are available and what the scoring criteria is. And out of that conversation, we're going to be having some additional meetings to our MPO meetings to take a further look to see if there are some changes warranted or needed in some of these things as we continue to move forward. Mainly, I think, wanting to equate the fairness between large and smaller communities and make sure that those dollars that are being distributed are being distributed on an equitable and equal basis. So that basically does conclude what happened at the MPO. Moving on to item 5 is the public invited to be heard. This would be for individuals wishing to participate on a non-agenda item. So we do have several folks who called up, but if you, when I call your name, if you are going to speak on an agenda item, you can wish to bypass that and wait until that agenda item is brought up to speak. Unless you are choosing to speak on a non-agenda item, I'll call your name, step to the podium, state your name and address for the record, and then you will have 3 minutes to provide your comments to the board. So the first person it looks like we have on the agenda this evening is Luke Coates. Did you want to speak now?
Sure.
Okay.
Luke Coates, 2426 Chandler Court, Fort Collins. Council, it's good to be with you. I'm a concerned citizen, and I'm an advocate for the environment. I love Colorado. I love Windsor. I do a lot of stuff in Windsor, and it's just been amazing, the growth and the prosperity in this beautiful city. I just really enjoy being here. I enjoy golfing here. A couple months ago, I was riding in an airplane, and I sat next to a lady that she asked me what I did for a living. And I said, I'm an advocate for the environment. And I also said I support oil and gas development. And she said, I'm anti-oil and gas. And we were on quite a long flight together. And so I asked her if I could get out my notebook and just take notes and listen to her. I said, I'm not going to say anything. I just want to hear what you have to say. And for a few hours, we talked, and I listened, and I took notes. And by the time the conversation was over, it was quite educational, and we learned some things about each other. But the main takeaway is we want the same thing. I'm a part of this community. I have a family. I have 4 children, and I want health, safety, and a clean environment. This subject is very emotionally driven, but I think it's important to look at the facts. The Environmental Protection Agency was established in 1970, in December of 1970, and at that time they started tracking emissions. Since the tracking of emissions in 1970, emissions have decreased by 73%. Our technologies are improving, our air and our water is getting cleaner. At the same time frame, they've correlated the consumption of natural gas with our water and our air. The more natural gas we've consumed, the cleaner our water and the cleaner our air has become. It's significant. In Colorado alone, we've had an increase of 700,000 people in the last 6 years. It's significant. We've got a lot of people moving in. So it's necessary that we continue to improve. The oil and gas industry has decreased emissions at the same time frame by 46%. It's significant. Anti-pollution technologies powered by oil and gas have contributed to keeping up with this population demand in this beautiful state. So we want to continue to improve and do things that make our state better, but also contribute to a clean and healthy environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ed Arnold.
Ed Arnold, 214 Castle Drive in Severance, Colorado. I showed up, I want to support the oil and gas here today. I moved to this community a year ago. This community's been great for my family. I've got a wife and 2 kids that are going to school here in RE4. I want nothing but safe and clean environment for them to go to. As Mr. Coates before me said, we have cleaned up the environment by using fossil fuels, and there is no switch that we can flip to go to renewable energies. Renewable energies are still reliant on fossil fuel, and as I found out earlier this week, windmill blades have a lifetime span of like 20 years, then they go sit in a landfill. Until we have a chance to get these renewable energies to a spot where they are renewable, where they are 100% renewable, we are still going to be reliant on oil and gas. And like I said, I wanted to show my support for the company that's doing this. I've worked for them, and I know that they've got our best interests at heart. Thank you.
Thank you. Regina Riley.
Could you move to the end of the list?
Oh, sure. Now or when we're in the subject matter?
Either or.
Okay. Mike Lucas.
My name is Mike Lucas, 2036 Bayfront Drive here in Windsor. Just wanted to come and address the board this evening. Like these gentlemen behind me who've already spoken, I also work in the oil and gas industry as a chemical engineer. Was able to be fortunate enough to come back to this community, spend time with my family. I've met my wife here. She's a three, 4 generation from the way back. Can't do anything but express my love for both the community, the people, the resources, everything that has brought me initially to this area. I was originally from Houston, but like they say, got here as quick as I could. I've enjoyed the mountains and just spending all the time. As a chemical engineer for a day job, also working in oil and gas, I'm very well informed of both the risks as well as the opportunities that exist with the technologies that are involved in this. And frankly, I'm one of those individuals very conscientious and very protective of my family, very comfortable with the technology, get opportunities to teach on it and speak on it from time to time. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for the opportunities that you've allowed us as an industry to be in this community, be a partner, help us grow better, help us to do better, help us to be a friendly environment which we can continue to operate, work, and also live as members of the community. So thank you very much for your time.
Karen Speed. Okay. J.D. Rogel?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind speaking on number 3, and then I'll go up, and then I'll wait to the next issue that...
You're going to wait till we get to the topic?
Yes.
Okay. So Regina Riley, or shall we wait for her when we're on the topic?
Yeah, we'll wait till the topic.
Okay. Okay. And we will move on to item B, which is our consent calendar. And this evening, it consists of 7 items under the consent calendar. Is there a motion?
Madam Mayor, I'd move that we approve the consent calendar as presented this evening.
Second.
Motion on the floor from Mr. Rennemeyer with a second from Mr. Sosowski, approving the consent calendar as presented. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. And the consent calendar passes unanimously. We're going to now move on to item C, board action, but before we do, tonight I'm going to ask that my board, that we lead by example, and please wait to speak until you have been recognized. And for decorum, I would ask that you not blurt out comments and avoid any impulses of name calling as we move forward. So with that, we'll move on to our board action, item 1. First item this evening is ordinance number 2019-1589, a smoking ban in parks, open space, and trails ordinance, second reading legislative action, and we have the pleasure of Ms. Foch giving us presentation this evening.
Madam Mayor and Town Board, thank you again for having us back for the second reading of the ordinance for smoking and vaping in parks. Tonight is a legislative action for the approval of the second reading. Just a little policy discussion and background on how we got here tonight. Last year, we had staff discussions with the Parks, Recreation, and Culture Advisory Board. We then teamed up with the Weld County Health Department, got some more information, and started working with them. Conducted a survey that we held for 2 weeks, and then we held meetings with the police chief and other team members from the police department. Parks, Rec, and Culture then had another work session where we proposed all of our findings to them and what was supported by the community, and then came to you guys for our first work session, and then had our first reading on June 24th, which did pass. Just a little background on the survey results. We had 1,057 folks respond online. We only kept that survey open for 2 weeks. City of Greeley kept theirs open for over a month, and they did receive fewer than we did on that. 84% of the respondents were supportive of banning smoking and vaping in all of our parks, open space, and trails. So based on the results of the survey and discussion with pre-cab, police, and town board, staff is recommending the banning smoking and vaping in all parks, open space, and trails, and the CRC campus with the exception of parking lots. So if approved tonight, staff will begin an education campaign and begin with public changes that will go into effect on January 1st of 2020. Since we're only have a couple concerts left in the summer concert series, we would probably, if passed, start that campaign beginning with Harvest Festival, roll into Oktoberfest, Windsor Wonderland, and then also just social media and on our website for that educational campaign to wrap up the year. You guys have any questions?
Okay, are there any questions for Ms. Foch? The only question I have would be, for the parking lots, are you guys going to provide like, but a place for
Yep,
folks
we
to
talked
put
about
out?
those little, kind of look like a vase.
Okay.
We have them at the rec center currently. They're out by the flagpole because that's the distance where it was currently legal to
Okay.
smoke near a public building.
So those will be in the parking lots
Yep,
or
we
in
can
the
definitely-
vicinity? So they can smoke outside the vehicle and inside, or
So
what's the?
What the ordinance did state was that they could smoke in the parking lot areas.
okay.
And that was when we met with the police department. They felt that that would be one way to compromise.
Okay, so this is second reading, and so at this time, if there are no further questions from the board, I would ask if there's anybody who wanted to come before the board on this agenda item, this would be the time. Okay?
JD, 224 North 6th. I live here in Windsor. I wasn't going to speak on this, but I thought I would because I live right across from the park. And I think this is a good step that we're actually doing to control this. I see some of those kids out there, and the amount of smoke that's let off, it's unbelievable. And I think they don't even understand the damage that smoke really does and how much nicotine there is. So I think this is a positive step in that direction. And I appreciate that we're looking into this and doing this. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Is there anybody else who wish to come before the board on this agenda item? Okay. Seeing none, if there are no further questions nor comments from the board, I'm certainly going to support this ordinance because I do agree with you, Mr. Roybal, that this is a step in the right direction, but mainly it's a step, again, to set a good example, hopefully for our kids, because it is the kids that we are mostly concerned about. The numbers that we saw, I think, led us all down that path that we were concerned, and we wanted to do have some action in place to avoid this continuing. So with that, I would seek a motion.
Madam Mayor, I move that we approve ordinance number 2019-1589 as presented.
Second?
Motion on the floor from Mr. Wilson with a second from Mr. Baker approving ordinance 2019-1589. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. Passes 6-0 unanimously as presented. Moving on to item 2, outside agency funding request from the Lions Club. And again, we have the pleasure of a presentation from Ms. Foch this evening.
Thank you again, Madam Mayor and Town Board. So in your board packets, you all received a request for a reimbursement to the Lions Club. They currently meet in a basement at a local church, and their group, as many service groups in our community, have started to see a decline. I spoke with Mr. Kaler a few weeks ago, and he was looking for an opportunity to get the word out about their Lions Club and hope that by maybe bringing them into the recreation center, that might help drive their membership. So we did talk. We have a room that we don't use on their Tuesday evenings. I did do the temporary booking of it, and that cost totals out from September through next December of approximately $960. If approved, Mr. Kaler and I do need to sit down because there are probably some holidays in there that we would take out, so it might vary. I think one even fell on Christmas Eve, which more than likely they won't be meeting that night. So it might be a little less than the $960 that is requested. Just a little background. 3 years ago, we started a policy with you guys on for groups that we partner with or sponsor their events. For example, Hops for Hunger, which is coming up, Wine Festival this weekend, Harvest Festival. Last year, I believe we sponsored Alex Highland, who is Miss Rodeo Colorado. So for example, those are just some groups. We did a 3-year agreement where every 3 years, so coming next early spring, late winter, after the first of the year, you will have a whole pile and group of folks that will be coming back and requesting those partnerships and sponsorships again for the next 3. As always, we're always looking to improve our processes, so if there's any, different ways of proposing this, we can definitely have those discussions, but tonight we do have the request from Mr. Kaler and the Lions Club to have a fee reimbursement to host their meetings at the Recreation Center.
Okay.
you guys have any questions for me or Mr. Kaler? He is here if anybody has any questions.
Mr. Kaler, would you like to step forward and say anything about the current organization or anything?
My name is Dean Kaler. Do you need an address from me or anything, or just?
If you would just state your
Okay,
address, yes.
Dean Kaler. My address is 10285 County Road 76 1/2 in Windsor. So how's that for a mouthful? Anyway, I've been a member of the Lions Club for about 10 years, and we're becoming the geriatrics club. Basically, I'm one of the youngest ones, and we've been trying to figure out how we can gain some membership, and we're kind of hoping that if we're having our meetings in a more public area than in a church, that we could put a poster up and maybe have people that maybe be interested, maybe drop in or visit with us possibly. So that's where the request came from.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, and I do want to remind you that you are being televised, so if you do want to make this a little bit of an infomercial.
We had to report to Rec Department and to the Harvest Festival that the Lions Club will not be able to do bingo this year because of our lack of membership.
Okay.
And with the state of the rules with raffle and bingo, you can only have members perform the duties. So we're down to the point where we can't have enough there. So it's going to really cut into our fundraising. So anybody interested in eyesight and hearing, for those that are less fortunate, come visit us. So how's that?
Are there any questions from Mr. Kaler about his agency request? Mr. Bennett, and then Mr. Suslowski.
Your request, is that for, is it intended to be an ongoing thing every year or just for the next?
If we can get our membership up, we can probably afford to do the payments, because I'm not sure what the rates were. We talked about that. I don't remember what they were off the top of my head. But at least at the initially trying to get some people more interested. And if we get a few numbers up, then we can build it into the dues that are required for our annual membership.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Suslowski.
Thank you, Mayor. It's sort of cryptically described here that the town would be, it says reimbursing the applicant $960, but I believe in fact it's not a reimbursement as much as it's financial support for the organization. Sorry.
I assumed it was kind of like in a grant situation.
Yeah, I think so.
If we need to have exchange of funds, we pay the town and they reimburse us, or I don't know how that works for sure.
And I guess a question for, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, so how we have worked with different groups in the past, for example, Miss Highland, when she had her event at the Recreation Center, she paid that up front so it doesn't show an effect on our revenues. And then out of the town board grant funds or their community fund, they then pay back the group that wrote that check.
When you said the 960 was from here through the end of...
So that is starting the Tuesday after Labor Day weekend,
Right.
and it goes through the end of December of 2020.
And is that paid monthly?
So they can either pay in full or we can do monthly payments, yes. Either way, we do that.
Because I guess that would tie to when I believe the town would reimburse, if you will, or give the grant, it would be as expended.
Yeah, so if their club can afford to write the $960 check, then the town board would then reimburse them in full that $960.
But if it's monthly, then we would
You guys
give them the
could
grant.
reimburse monthly too. That would be a lot of work on staff.
And actually, we don't have any meetings in the month of December, so.
So it actually would knock off about $120 for the month of December. It's $30 an hour to rent the room that they're using.
Okay, so I think, at least I have to simply view this as the town supporting a particular organization in the amount of $900, or whatever amount they expend, up to $960, which I guess we do for other organizations as well. I'm just always a little sensitive about how taxpayer money is being spent to subsidize things. So, okay, thanks for your clarification.
Any additional questions? I have a question, I guess, maybe for Mr. McCarter or Mr. Hale. Since this comes from the town board outside agency funding, and the comment was made that once we kind of make this request, as we have previously, then they're kind of ongoing. Does that, year after year, if that request is being met, Does that come out of our agency funding off the top every year then? For continuous years?
Yeah, I believe so,
Okay,
Mayor.
then I would request that for our budget meeting, I'd like to have a list of what all those current ongoing agency requests are, what we're being funded and what's coming out of the budget every year.
So they're ongoing for it was a policy you guys had decided upon in a work session. So they're ongoing for 3 years, and then after the 3rd year, they have to come back with their financials and do the request again.
Right.
So yeah, I can get you that list.
But I just think it would be good for us to know what we're spending money on. If there are no further questions for Mr. Kaler, then I'm certainly going to support this, only because I've been fortunate enough to see the Lions Club membership in action, and truly 100% of the money that you take in does go back out into the community in the ways that you shared with us. Can you say it again, what your main...
Basically, we support hearing and eyesight is our main goal.
Right.
We've also supported groups like Stepping Stones, the food bank at the church at Faith United, and anybody who requests hearing aids or eyeglasses that can't afford it. And so there's several options. We also do a scholarship to a high school student and that kind of things for volunteerism.
So if there's anything we can do to help raise their visibility and hopefully get you some additional membership so that we can continue to have an organization of your stature and keep them in our community, I think it is well worth the money spent. So,
thank you.
And with that, I would seek a motion.
Madam Mayor, I move that we approve the request for funding of the Lions Club.
Second.
Motion on the floor from Mayor Pro Tem Bennett with a second from Mr. Baker, approving the outside agency funding request for the Lions Club. All in favor signify with yes, opposed no. And the funding request passes unanimously. Moving on to item 3, resolution number 2019-58, a resolution accepting the donation of public art. Legislative action, Mr. Lucas is going to give presentation. Mr. Lucas.
Thank you, Mayor and Board. Before you tonight is a request for acceptance of a resolution that would allow you to bring in some public art to our community. In July, Mr. Lind offered to the town to donate 2 very large pelicans and their stand that they go on to go into the roundabout that was just completed and opened last week at 7th and New Liberty. That's a picture of the actual pelicans in the warehouse that they're in currently. They're 22 feet wide wingspan on both birds. They sit on about a 15-foot tall pedestal. They're very similar to the birds that are outside of Pelican Lakes at the golf course right now, just larger in scale. Those birds are about 15 foot wide in terms of wingspan. These would be 22. As you know, we have a public art plan that was adopted by this board back in 2010. That's what we've been following along. Since that time, we used this same public art plan to accept the family statue, including the mother that we just recently adopted down at Boardwalk Park. So this plan is ongoing, and I would argue, as it is in your packet as well, that this donation meets all 5 of these guidelines in terms of enhancing public art in our community. This would be our first public art piece in a roundabout. We have many roundabouts, so I think that's an area where we could continue to grow public art. I will let you know that, as you know, there's a public art master plan being done right now. So I would expect the process will probably change a little bit in the future. What we're hoping to come out of this current plan. Right now, the kind of overarching recommending board is pre-cab. So on the pre-cab agenda on August 6th, the board voted unanimously, so that was last week, Tuesday. They voted unanimously to recommend that this board adopt a resolution to accept the public art into our collection and then have them installed. So before you tonight is that resolution to accept the donation of public art. I will tell you that in anticipation of your acceptance, we've been engaging an engineer to make sure that the base is engineered properly to be able to hold these pelicans, because they are quite large. But I would request that you do consider adoption of the resolution before you tonight, and if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Okay. Are there any questions for Mr. Lucas? Mr. Bennett.
I've said this before, I'm a strong proponent for a lot of reasons of the value of public art in the community. And a while back, I had the opportunity to actually see the sculpture in the workshop. It's exquisite, it's wonderful. And the idea that it's being donated is just incredible. My question is, the pedestal and the infrastructure and the work that goes in there, how's that being paid for?
So the concrete that is in the ground that will hold, they'll have the bolts in to hold the structure is incorporated in the cost of the roundabout.
Okay.
So that's being done right now. It would be part of that capital project. The only other expense that we're anticipating in the future would be cleaning and polishing of that. We're not quite certain what that cost will be, but we're working on the actual cost to install right now.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions? Okay, Mr. Redemeyer.
This might seem a little silly, but I'm going to ask this. Some of our roundabouts some of our early roundabouts were plowed through by errant drivers that shouldn't have been out on the road late on the night. Let's just say that this piece of work would get demolished in the course of a errant, drunk driver or something like that hits our roundabout. What then happens? Is it just not put back up? Is it the town's insurance policy? Is it just gone forever? Is it replaced? Do we have an answer to that? I don't know. I'm just trying to think of the worst case.
It would be an insurance claim.
It is an insurance?
Yeah,
So
it would. It's town property.
town property, okay.
But the driver's insurance should.
Excuse me.
Sorry.
Okay, would you like to be recognized?
Yes, sorry, Mayor.
Okay, Mr.
No,
Bliss.
I was just gonna point out that the driver's insurance would be the primary one responsible if they were negligent. If they were uninsured, then it would fall back onto the town.
Anybody else? I had two questions. Is this going to be in the center or off center?
Yes, it's pretty much center of the roundabout.
Okay, and then we're going to incorporate landscaping around that, I would assume this fall, or
So
will that happen
the
this
landscaping is already done and completed. We,
good.
in anticipation of your acceptance, we spoke to the contractor and left enough room in the center for the base so that they were able to run their irrigation lines and plantings around where the base would be installed. Assuming that you approve this tonight, then we'll give them the go-ahead to complete the engineering, do the install, which probably requires a partial day shutdown because this structure is so large, we'll need to bring a small crane in and lift it in there.
So what's the timeline if we approve tonight?
My goal is to have it done by Labor Day, but that's under an assumption that all parties involved are able to get that completed. Worst case, sometime in September.
So I know some of these roundabouts were outfitted with electric. Is this one of those, and will it have any kind of lighting feature?
So we included a sleeve for the future addition of lighting. It's not there currently today. We've done the same thing at the 7th and Crossroads roundabout. We left a sleeve under the road in anticipation at some point in time that we may put public art at that one and could light it as well.
Okay.
Yeah, the intersections will have electricity, Your Honor, so with the sleeve there, it wouldn't be, I don't think, a big effort to pull some additional electricity over there, because we will have all the intersections lit.
Okay. Okay, and Mr. Bennett, you have something final.
Could you please repeat the name of the artist again?
I don't remember his name off the top of my head. I will get that for you.
I heard it and I don't remember either.
Yes,
I
I've
feel bad
met
about
him,
that.
if
I
he
feel
was
bad
standing
about
here,
that
I
to
could
read
point him
out.
out, but yeah.
Maybe next board meeting we can acknowledge who the
Absolutely.
artist
We can
is.
recognize, how about we recognize him
Yeah.
when it's installed?
And I forgot the name too.
Yeah, that would be a great idea.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. So if there are no further questions with that, then I would seek a motion.
Madam Mayor, I move that we approve resolution number 2019-58.
Second.
Motion on the floor from Mr. Redemeyer with a second from Mr. Baker, approving Resolution 2019-58. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. And the resolution carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 4, a public hearing. A public hearing for a conditional use grant to allow oil and gas facilities in the Windsor North Annex called Gomer Pad. Quasi-judicial action. Ms. Malone will give presentation. Mr. Kozlowski, did you need to read your comment or not yet?
I should do that,
Okay.
Madam Mayor, thank you.
Perhaps we should entertain the motion and get into the public hearing before you recite into the record. So-
Okay, okay. Then I would seek a motion to open public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Motion on the floor from Mr. Redemeyer with a second from Mr. Bennett. Opening public hearing, all in favor vote yes, opposed no. Public hearing is now open. Mr. Sosowski?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. For the record, I'd like to point out that in my capacity as Town Board Liaison to the Planning Commission, I was present at the Planning Commission meeting during which this matter was previously presented. I wish to state that my participation in the Planning Commission proceedings has in no way influenced me in my capacity as a Town Board member this evening. I'll make my decision and cast my vote this evening based solely on the evidence presented during this public hearing. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Malone.
Thank you, Mayor and Town Board. The item before you is a conditional use grant for oil and gas facilities. This application was reviewed with compliance with Section 16.7 of the Municipal Code regarding conditional use grants. Additionally, the code outlines a specific section for oil and gas facilities. These facilities are allowed in any zone district in the town limits with a conditional use grant approved by the town board. There are three main criteria that staff reviews the application. That includes visual requirements, landscape, and floodplain requirements. This site is located south of Weld County Road 76, approximately half a mile west of State Highway 257, also half a mile east of Weld County Road 15, and about 3/4 of a mile north of County Road 74, Harmony Road. The property is zoned residential mixed use, and again, oil and gas facilities are allowed in this zone district with a conditional use grant. The applicant is proposing a truck route that would head, the access point would be on Weld County Road 76, and the hauling would head east on 76, south on Highway 257, and then west on 74 towards I-25. They also have an alternative route, which is shown here in the blue. The hauling would head north on 257 and then head west on State Highway 14 towards I-25. At the Planning Commission meeting last week on the 7th, the Planning Commission did ask the applicant to consider switching the primary route and the alternative route, just given all the construction going on Harmony Road and additional traffic there. One of the main points of the neighborhood meeting, or the concern in the neighborhood meeting, was the truck route, which was originally proposed to head west on County Road 76. And as you can see here, the applicant has changed that so that it heads east. There are 18 wells proposed for this site. The closest residential structure is approximately 1,000 feet to the west and 800 feet to the south. Further west, 2,400 feet, are the closest subdivisions. Those include the Ross subdivision and Alexander Estates. So the overall property consists of 94 acres. The pad will be 18 acres, and again, 18 wells with associated equipment. And included here just shows you the distance between the property boundary and the closest structures. A neighborhood meeting was held on January 10th of this year. There were 35 residents that attended, mostly from the subdivisions to the west, the Ross subdivision and Alexander Estates. The area shown here in the yellowish green are the properties that were notified. The applicant also contacted, I believe, 2 leaders of the subdivisions to the west, and the majority of those residents did attend that neighborhood meeting. The public hearing notice also included that area shown here in the yellow. Last week, on August 7th, the Planning Commission forwarded to the town board a recommendation of approval of the conditional use grant, subject to all site-specific conditions, and there are several I'll cover here. In addition to the town's standard conditions for approval of oil and gas facilities, and those have been updated over time to address more current technologies. So the three specific conditions for this site, the truck hauling route as shown in the presentation, the truck hauling periods, which would try to avoid school traffic hours and commuter traffic hours, and then that the berms with native seating and landscaping is completed no later than 90 days after production has begun on the pad. The case here that the wells will be done in 2 different phases, and we wanted to make sure that the landscaping was done sooner rather than later. And then the condition at the bottom includes the town standard conditions of approval for oil and gas. Staff requests that the following be entered into the record: the application, supplemental materials, staff memorandum, supporting documents, testimony from public hearing, and the recommendation. That concludes my presentation.
Okay.
I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, questions from the board for Ms. Malone? Mr. Rennemeyer.
At the meeting last week, you said that they had asked the operator about the switching of the alternate and the primary route. What was the, was there a response to that request?
I'd need to defer to the applicant on that.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Is the applicant present this evening?
Yes.
Can you step forward and maybe answer his question?
My name's Troy Owens, and I'm the development lead for extraction oil and gas for the Windsor area, and we have no problem switching the primary and the secondary for the access routes.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? Mr. Wilson.
Just real quick, and you might want to stay close. My question in the packet talked about pipelines for gas and then tankers for oil, potentially investigating. Is my impression, I guess, is there a pipeline in that area to transport the gas out now? Or where are you at as far as maybe just give out pipelines for, and is there a difference gas and oil, and what are you doing there?
Yeah, there are differences between oil and gas pipeline. There's 2 of them. For the gas pipeline, we have a clear line of sight for, I think, Q2 next year to be installed. And the oil pipeline we're also very close there. We don't have a 100% guarantee from the company, but it's very close to being connected. As for like the routes, I believe they're coming from the north, but that's a third-party company. I don't know 100% where.
Do your other sites in Windsor have pipelines to them, like in the rain dance area, for example?
Correct.
I mean, there's quite a bit of truck traffic, so I just wondered, is there are gas and oil pipelines into that area, or just, maybe, I'm just curious, I guess.
I know the Merlin pad, I believe the new Merlin pad, the new rain dance pad that we just rebuilt has pipeline. I believe the RBF pad has pipeline as well, but I'm not 100% sure on the others.
Okay, my last question just had to do.
Before, can I have a point of clarification from him on your subject before you move on?
Sure.
So for clarification then, the pipeline discussion is really a future point and opportunity? It won't be a immediate, is that?
We're really hopeful that we'll have it by the time production starts.
So you're thinking it still might be able to happen simultaneously?
Correct.
Oh, I didn't realize that you could make that happen.
We won't have, or there won't be a water pipeline, which is a third one, which
Okay.
might be some of the traffic that
So
you're
that's
getting
the
to.
packet implied that there'd be gas pipeline and then potentially a oil pipeline. Okay. Then the other question was just venting versus flaring. Air quality has been a topic of discussion lately, and even though I went to a presentation and the head of the CDPHE was there, and they said even though the technology has gotten better and the emissions from, say, per well have gone down, the sheer number of wells, you probably saw that, you know, the air quality in Colorado was just recently degraded. So we've been talking about venting versus flaring, and what are you looking at this particular location?
This one, even if we don't have an oil pipeline there won't be any venting or open flares. It'll be all completely enclosed loop system, and we'll try to capture as much gas as we can, send it down the pipeline, and the 1% that we can't, we put it to an incinerator that's completely enclosed and totally destroys all the gas in there up to like a 99.8% grade, I believe. Also, we have a couple air experts here also if you have other questions.
Unless they have something to add.
Okay. Any additional questions? Mr. Bennett?
Yes, I've got a lot of them. I'm going to try to consolidate these, okay? But on the CUG, there's a section dealing with oil and gas equipment, dealing with sound. I see that you're using electronic motors, which are noticeably quieter. There's three parts to my question. Are there required limits to the noise, like so many decibels? How is that monitored and measured? And how is that reported? If noise levels went above a certain level, how do we in the town, how soon and how would we know about it?
I might defer to our
That might be
community relations person on that one. She knows a lot about sound. Patty.
Hello, my name is Joanna Ostra. I'm with Extraction. I'm the regulatory manager. So to speak to sound monitoring, so what we do before we select a site is we do an ambient sound analysis. So we analyze what's the existing sound levels in the area. Is it noisy? Is it more quiet residential? And what we do is we model the equipment that we have on location, and then we build a plan for sound walls and sound mitigation on each location. And so in this plan, I believe we have sound walls planned based on this sound mitigation plan. The COGCC has certain levels for sound, and we make sure that we're under those, and if there's issues with that, there's things we can do. For instance, I think on this location, we're gonna have electricity there, so that, as you mentioned, that significantly reduces sound, because you don't have to have generators there to create electricity, so reduces sound levels quite significantly.
So you have some type of equipment here that on an ongoing basis is measured the sound level?
We don't currently have that. We do bring it out if needed, if there's
As needed.
yeah, if we have issues with folks having comments on it, we bring we have handheld monitors we bring out. We have folks on site every day checking the equipment and making sure things are going well. And as you've heard, there's lots of folks that live in the communities nearby, they're oil and gas. So we all kind of work together to make sure we're not impactful on the community.
I'm looking at ways that we measure, like if a resident calls me or calls in and hearing about the sound, I would like to be able to tell them it is below a certain decibel level or it's above.
Yeah.
Do we have the ability of doing that?
Yeah, so we have a couple of folks on staff that when we have handheld sound monitors that we come out and take measurements. We have our community relations gal in the audience, but we have a 24-hour community hotline, so they can call us and let us know, hey, I heard a loud noise at this time. Usually we can correlate it to some sort of activity that was happening on location. Of course, the noisiest stuff is the upfront drilling and completion, so we can kind of pinpoint, oh, this was happening at location, but let's go out there, see what's going on, walk around the sound walls, and try to address whatever issue it may be. Sometimes it's just turning equipment a certain different way and directing noise.
Okay, thank you.
Is that it?
I'll have more.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, Mr. Sosowski.
Thank you, Mayor. I think for the engineer, I'm just curious of the status of your applications, or if you have submitted 2 and 2A applications with COGCC at this time.
We have submitted them, but they are on hold pending local disposition.
Yeah.
Anything further?
No.
Anything further? Okay, Mr. Baker.
Was there any consideration to move this out of our residential zoning?
I don't believe there was. We have been working with the landowner here for 2 or 3 years now. Also been working with the city on this one, I believe. There was originally going to be a baseball park planned here, so we did everything we could to move it away from that one as we could. And then now we've did everything we could there to try to move it, which is how we landed on this location. And also, the landowner wants it to free up as much of his land as will be available after we're done for reuse.
Anything additional? If not, did you
Oh, I
have something else?
yeah.
Okay.
You got 2 pages.
Okay.
I'm gonna make it concise. Air quality. In your slides, you have a diagram that shows the emissions control device. Could you just expound on that a little bit about what does that really do in terms of air quality and emissions?
Yeah, we call it the ECD, and that is the incinerator that I was talking about before, which takes the very minimal excess gas that we can't put down the sales line and totally combust it internal, no outside flame or anything.
That's combusted internally and down in the hole?
It's still like it's about 22 feet tall once the production's online,
Okay, I know
and
what
it's
that is.
incinerated
Okay.
inside.
All right. Along the same lines, your diagram also showed that you have it's under the section called automation, that you have a remote shutdown. Could you explain what that is?
Yeah, we have several, we call it SCADA, which monitors the site, 24/7 electronic monitors that communicates wirelessly. We have about 100 plus various pressure monitors throughout the whole system, and it can instantly detect if something's going wrong. Either shut down that part or that separator or something like that, or if it's worse, it'll shut down the whole well or shut down the whole site. It's all depending on kind of where the problem is detected.
And along that same line, the language said remote. I'm wondering if that is it's operated by a human who gets a notice, or is it automatic?
I believe we have automatic shutdowns put in there, and also remote shutdowns when someone's watching it and something's not working correctly.
And 2 more questions regarding air quality. Do you have any type of technology in place that will be in place that continuously monitors emissions?
We will not, most likely by the time we're drilling this, but we will have our LDAR program, which last week we talked a little bit about the infrared cameras. We have 2 of those internally with the company, and during the first month or so of production, we'll be out there once a week, looking at everything on the facility, any possible leaks. And these cameras are so powerful that they can, see fumes coming off a permanent marker if you take the cap off. So that'll be the first month, and then the first year we'll be out there at least every month, and usually that continues for the first several years. And then once we feel the facility is running good enough, after several years we'll slow it down to quarterly, and then eventually semi-annually. But internally we've only had 1 pad so far that we only visit semi-annually out of everything we've got.
Okay, I read your literature on leak detection. You kind of explained that. But what I'm understanding is you do not have a 24/7 system of monitoring air quality or leak detection. It's once a week, once a month. So is it possible? What, your answer was yes?
Or I was going to defer to our 2 air experts we have in here.
This is a really important question, because I want to be able to tell our citizens that yes, you're safe, you're not breathing in something, or I want an early detection system if there is a problem. Anything mechanical can have a problem. That's not blaming anybody, but this is a really important point for me.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
air quality, how are you monitoring that? How often? How would we know that I can assure people that they're okay? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Kelly Cox. I work for Extraction. I'm the air quality coordinator. And I know what you're asking about continuous monitoring. We have a lot of that going on right now. I had mentioned in one of the last week's meeting that I was here that there is some of that testing going on for what people are trying to understand meets the term continuous. But I would say it's very limited in scope. We're barely able to get units into this country to install on a couple of pads right now to even make sure that they work. But in terms of your question about being able to feel confident that you're not exposing the public to something, we do have a lot of data out there right now that's been collected. The term continuous makes things difficult, but there's been a lot of like SUMA canisters that have been collected around the state that continually, I mean, tens and thousands of them that have been collected around oil and gas operations and continually show that they don't have an impact or that they don't see an impact from oil and gas operations. Like Troy also mentioned, we might do an LDAR inspection once a month, or at least that's what's required by LDAR regulations, once a month. That's the most frequent.
Okay.
But we have people manning these facilities 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the first years of operation. So they're on site. They're trained to walk around doing an inspection. We call them AVO inspections, audio, visual, olfactory inspections, where you're trained to listen, hear, see, smell what you see on a location every day as you walk around. So I just want you to understand that these inspections are being done all the time.
So that, just to follow up with that would be my question. So you do have people on site every day for his question, for leak detection, that if there was something happening, they
are there to address
it.
Right.
I mean, even if you don't have a piece of equipment per se, you do have personnel on site that might be able to pick up
and I would
something.
almost say it's kind of like a culmination of things. Like Troy mentioned, there's a ton of automation on site that's monitoring levels, temperatures, pressures, things like that, so that we can have alarms that set off to engineers in Denver, or people in the field that say, hey, there might be a problem, or go address this. That happens, that's automation. But then we have people staffed that are at these facilities also.
Just one more follow-up on that. Did I hear you say that you're having difficulty getting the equipment?
For continuous monitoring?
Right.
Absolutely.
And is it manufactured overseas?
Yes.
So
many of them.
Manufactured overseas.
Yeah, so then it's just trying to get the equipment installed and then picking out a site that works, because you need very good cell reception at these sites, and as you know, we work remotely.
Right.
So there's a lot of limitations we're experiencing right now, but we're trying. It's important to us. We want to use things that work too.
Thank you.
Any additional questions from the town board before we open it up to the public comment? Do you want to continue with yours? Okay.
Yeah, different topic.
Okay.
I'm going to be pretty thorough on this, more thorough than we have on some others. Water quality, same type of questions. How is it monitored? How is it reported? How would and when would the town know if there is a problem with the water?
Yeah, water, I mean, like the automation we have on site already, helps notify us if there's any, any little leakage or anything like that. We also have primary, secondary, tertiary berms around any, even separators, the tanks. We also do water testing before we even drill on wells around the new pads. And then after, I believe it's maybe 90 days, we go in and test the water again from those wells and make sure there isn't any contamination. And might look back to a regulatory manager and see if there's anything else on water we miss.
Hello again, Joanna Ostrom. So I was just thinking about the COGCC regulation. So we have to test 2 water wells within a half mile of our location. We have an environmental coordinator who handles all that. So what they do is they test before there's any sort of activity on the site to kind of get a baseline. And then we do tests afterwards to make sure that everything is still as it was before. There's also, so this is all reported to the COGCC. There's extensive data online that the public can access to kind of look at water quality trends across the DJ Basin. And that data is really interesting. It basically shows there's no impact. So there's a lot of data out there, and there's also, at every location, it's a COGCC regulation to test water quality.
Thank you. One more topic.
No, continue. Ask all your questions so that we can.
This may seem a little strange because there's not many humans living close to that or camping there right now, but lighting and fencing. This land is zoned for multi-family mixed use. If and when it's developed and more people are living there, what type of fencing would be around there? and talk a little bit about the lighting, how bright, hours, is it shielded? And I know that's a little strange right now because there's not even cows there, I don't think, but as this
Yeah.
develops, are you putting those systems in place now, or is that something that would come as residents become living there?
Currently, we are on this pad in particular. I haven't done my presentation or anything, but we've got a 4-foot berm going around the west side, which I believe will shield those residents. For lighting, we already try to use LED lights and point them straight down to try to mitigate any light escaping. We also regularly put up shielding on any lights that might be shining off the pad, or, like we alluded to before, we have a community manager that's open 24/7 taking calls, and routinely if a pad is a light, that got misplaced and is pointing somewhere, we'll take a call, have someone out there, and if they're not already there, just go fix it within the hour and not point it out there. And we've also worked with the landowner for when they do development and they'll provide, like, if the houses are getting closer that they're building, any landscaping and berming and fences that'll go around there to shield any visual impacts.
So when development comes there, residential development, would the town be involved in talking about the landscaping or berming, or is that something, you said you'd be working with the developer on that? That might be
Not
staff.
100% sure on the subdivision development CUGs, but
Or would that would probably go to the site development for the development?
I believe that's a question best answered by
That's maybe
planning.
that's getting off the CUG, I apologize. That was my list.
Is that your final question?
That's my final question, thank you.
Okay, did you want to answer this question?
I can answer that question, sure. So the applicant will be doing some landscaping, but of course, once it's developed, then it may be commercial, residential, it is mixed residential. That developer would provide some buffer treatment around that. I mean, don't know the specifics because it really would depend on the use, but we do have buffer requirements between uses that are not compatible.
Okay, Mr. Renmark?
I'm glad this topic's come up because I'm actually glad for Mr. Bennett's comments on this, or his questions. You had just made, I believe, the comment about the response. It's one thing to know that there's an issue or that we've seen an issue, et cetera. Is there like a critical response unit? What's the response time? Is it local individuals that are all notified at once to report to a certain pad if there is something that's detected or a leak, or what's the response? Because following up on his questions, I think it leads to safety of the community. What's the response time to handle an issue that may arise?
Yeah, we work with the Windsor Fire Department first and foremost. We've worked with them for years and always come up with a tactical response plan before. I believe it's required internally by our company, but also I believe it's a COA from Windsor that we have to have a response plan already set before we start any activity. But I might look to Dustin, you might know this more on this for was a tactical response time and kind of internal response if there's a problem that we detect on a well site. How fast we get there.
Hi, Dustin Case with Extraction Oil and Gas on the air quality team and some response for safety. So we have an office actually currently in the Greeley area, but our response time from Windsor Fire to this area would be pretty quick. It's about 10 minutes potentially for any sort of emergency that would be handled. And then Joanna, do you have any more response stuff for?
Sure, yes, of course.
Specifically to the safety side?
Yeah. So we have an emergency response coordinator. His whole job, he's actually a former chief of the Greeley Fire Department, and now he works for Extraction Oil and Gas. And he helps us build our emergency response plans and our tactical response plans. And as they mentioned, we work with the local fire department to make sure they're aware of our plan. They know what kind of equipment we're going to have there, how many wells, our time of our operations, and we build a plan with them that works both for them and for us. And internally, we have a pretty robust emergency response plan. Like who's on location, who do they call next, and who do they call next, the time span in which they call that. If we get one call, that's fine. If you get two calls, you better pick up the phone. There's something that's happened. We have certain SOPs and standards for how we handle that. And we like to work with the local responders. We have done trainings with different responders. In our Broomfield development, we worked and we had a mock drill on one of our locations. So this was prior to any equipment showing up or us drilling. But we had the fire, we basically didn't tell anyone that there was an event, but then we had a 911 call, and so everybody showed up like there was an event there, and we did the whole walkthrough of, okay, if this was a real event, what would happen, who would show up, what kind of equipment would show up. So we really pride ourselves on working with the local responders so we know what the plan and everyone's comfortable with that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any final questions? Mr. McCarter.
Madam Mayor, we took this out of order a little bit, and given that I sat through the Planning Commission public hearing, I know Troy had a presentation, some or all of which is in your materials, but I want to make certain that Troy has an opportunity to present whatever he wants in addition to the questions he has answered for you tonight. So I would just urge that he be given that opportunity if he feels it necessary.
Okay. Did you want to give any further presentation?
Yeah, I could run through it pretty
Okay.
quick. We covered
Okay.
the majority of it in questions, but.
Okay.
All right. We'll just go through it real quick for the Gomer Notice Pad development. And my name's Troy Owens, a development lead from Extraction here. I've been working for Extraction for about 5 years now. And Extraction is 100% based in Colorado. We got an office in Denver and Greeley. We're currently building an office actually in Windsor right now. Hopefully it's ready in October. And yeah, we pride ourselves on embracing innovation and driving change and technology, being accountable with communities and working together with them. We've been working with Windsor, I think, since the company was first started in 2013. Real quick life cycle of the well. I think most everyone's already pretty familiar, it seems like, with oil and gas, but typically we spend about 2 to 4 days drilling per well. And then the completion phase starts after that, which is about 3 to 8 days per well. We're getting closer to 3 or 4 day average on that one. And once that's done, we reclaim about half the acreage into landscaping or native grass or whichever is required. And the pad will be on production, which will be there for 20 to 30 years until the wells are abandoned and the facilities are gone and it looks like nothing was ever there. Here's the traffic route real quick. This one's a little old. If we can switch the primary and the secondary routes. And we got both pads on this one. It's the same route that you saw before. Here's the Gomer drilling pad. It'll be about 18 acres while we're out there drilling. And we're currently planned on having sound walls, which, like we said before, we've already done a sound study, and they recommended that, it was a third party, and they recommended that we include sound walls on the north side, the west side, and the southeast corner to help mitigate any visual and sound impacts. Sound walls are another thing that Extraction actually pioneered and brought into the basin. Here is what the Gomer facility will look like after we've done interim reclamation, and it'll be down to about 7 acres. And here you can see the 4-foot berm that we added on the north and west side to just help further screen the facility from the houses, even though they're about a half mile away on that side. We'll skip the Otis for now. Drilling, we've already covered sound walls and lights. One thing we didn't talk about really was just from 2014, 2015, and these few years, we've already decreased we're about 4 times faster in drilling than we were back then. So our goal is to get in, get out, and be safe. Here's a quick diagram showing the hydraulic fracturing phase, and we just do this to establish communication between the well bore we drilled and the reservoir that's about 1.5 miles underground. Here's an updated picture of what a frac looks like. This has the Liberty Quiet fleet out there, which is one thing we'll be using while we're fracking the Gomer pad, which significantly mitigates sound compared to the old pump trucks we had. Another thing we've brought to the basin with the help of Liberty was the new sandbox system, which is about a year or two old now. But with that, it helped significantly reduce any silica dust, which would be produced from sand trucks coming in, blowing off sand, things like that. So it makes the air a whole lot cleaner. It also allows us to load sand in and store it really fast to help us move even quicker and get out of there. And finally, one thing we did just bring in, I believe in the last year, is a dual fuel fleet, which I think all Liberty trucks are. And the trucks start on diesel, and then once they're running, they switch to natural gas, which helps significantly reduce emissions from the trucks while we're fracking. And also we have a lay flat water pipe in order to get the water to location, which cuts the truck traffic in half if we don't have to drive in all the water with the trucks. The closed loop production site, which you guys have already alluded to and we talked about. Here with all of our tanks, we'll have a LACT system on there, so it's just one connection for every truck if we do truck water or truck oil off, which helps significantly lower emissions by only having one connection point. You don't have to go to each tank. It also helps that we don't have to measure the tanks anymore, so there's no reason to open the thief hatches and vent the tanks or anything like that. And air quality, which I think we kind of went over good enough in the questions. And that's it.
Okay. Are there additional questions from the board based on the presentation we just saw?
This might seem comical, but one of your pictures there of a typical well site showed a helipad with a helicopter. Do people come and go via helicopters from the pad sites and stuff, or is it
never have.
Executives or like?
They've
Can't say that I've seen
but-
that before, but it was on there, so I thought I had to ask if people were coming and going from the Gomer and Otis pads with helicopters.
Might be the future, but I believe it's just for emergency response.
Okay. If not, then we're going to now open this to the public hearing. However, I do want to caution those who are coming to speak before the board that your comments or questions should be kept specific to this application that is before us, because that is, as the questions from the board came, they were specific to the application. They should not be just general comments on oil and gas this evening. Those should be provided at another point in time. But if you have questions or public hearing that you want specific to what is before us right now, this would be the opportunity, and I will recognize you if you raise your hand, step to the podium, state your name and address for the record, and then that will be your opportunity. Is there anybody wishing to come before the board? Now would be the time. First you, Ms. West, and then we'll have Mr. Roybal.
I'm Diane West, and my address is on record here. And I am concerned, just as Mr. Bennett, with the air quality and the water quality. And with the passing of the Senate Bill 181, that was approved April 16th, that requires that, our towns are concerned about our health, and they can require the oil companies or extraction for tonight to pay for the testing. That the testing, which is probably not exactly always cheap, the oil companies are required to pay for it if the town orders them to do that. So this is something that needs to be established tonight, some of these very costly things to the taxpayer. If we don't require things ahead of time that is built into Senate Bill 181, our town could go broke. Because it costs, just for one well to be plugged, according to Matt Lepore of the Colorado Oil and Gas, it cost $85,000 per wellhead. So I don't know what financial position Extraction is, but we need to require some of these things up front before anything is approved, such as this. And and I think it would be a good idea for baseline testing to be completed. This is something that I requested early on, even when Lac Coon Lakes came to town. And that they should test the air and water, not just wells, before they drill. And they can test for the air, not just emissions, because emissions that they test for, that were dinged for by the federal law, does not include benzene and the air toxics. It includes methane and several other things, but the things that really cause cancer, the emissions from the Colorado Department of Public Health toxicologists told me at a meeting, a natural resource meeting in Fort Collins, they do not test for benzene in that formula. So when people think we're even in compliance, that doesn't mean we're safe. So we need to be sure that the air toxics and the VOCs are being tested for. And I would suggest that we do a baseline for the VOCs and air toxics associated with, that's earmarked for oil and gas, which the scientists at NSTAR in Boulder, they know those specific earmarked chemicals and air toxics. And then they could also, you could require them to also do a baseline for the car emissions chemicals, because there is a difference. And I think some people do not realize that. And so when people try to blame it on car emissions versus oil and gas, this is a way around it. Like I said, the scientists at NSTAR, they know the difference. And I think that it would be wise to do a baseline. Then after, if they were approved, not that I agree with them being approved, but if they were approved, then when they're doing the after testing, we'd see if there was a difference.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Ruggles?
There was a lot of people getting it signed first. I appreciate it. Please let them go first.
I'm sorry, I didn't see any other hands go up. I just saw these two hands. Was there some hands over here? Nope.
JD, 224 North 6th. Where do I start? I've got a lot of comments I'd like to make, but I'm going to reserve a lot of that for some other time. But if we can, before this is over, I'd like to go back to the roundabout if I can sometime. But I just want to let you know that where I stand on this issue, and the reason I stand on this is I actually have history within this industry, and I'd like to just let you know that when Karen speaks up here, I just want to let you know I'm on her side on this issue. And I also want to mention the moratorium, because as we're talking about different things, you know, the state supposedly put a floor in. It sounds like we're trying to remove the floor, but we already have in place some municipalities elsewhere that are actually just established moratoriums to actually decide where these rules are going to go in the direction we need to do. So I strongly would support a moratorium, and that's including with this side. Thank you.
Is there anybody else who wishes to come before the board on this particular agenda item? Now would be the time.
You guys done? Anybody else wants to speak?
Did you wish to speak?
You bet.
Then please come forward.
These packets have what I'm going to be explaining with documents. Hi, my name is Karen Speed, 8310 Cherry Blossom Drive. I will start with extractions nearby Walt Well Pad. You have a copy of the production sheet on the one Walt well that has been producing since July 2018. The other 5 permitted wells have not been drilled yet. Looking at the production sheet, the flared gas on the one well operating since July 1st of 2018 through May of 2019 has over 13 million cubic feet of uncaptured natural gas. The effects on the environment and human health could easily be impacted due to the toxic chemicals that can travel in those plumes. I doubt seriously the mineral owners were compensated for lost revenues from such intentional activity. Also on that well, there was an over 500-gallon oil spill this past April 17th. And though the reports state that the spill was contained to the pad, there was a contaminated pea gravel that had to be disposed of and replaced. Also, there appears to have been worker exposure during this process. You can see the photos in there. They were not wearing protective masks for breathing. Yes, both workers have a monitor on, but one worker is not even wearing gloves. It appears they wore no hazmat suits to protect their clothes or shoes. Another recent concern with extraction is the COGCC ruling on August 1st against extraction regarding gross violation of COGCC Rules 1002B and 1002F. Rule 1002F demands implementation of best management practices regarding controlling stormwater runoff to prevent erosion, transport of sediment, and site degradation. This clearly can result in environmental impacts, as was pointed out by the COGCC in that meeting. COGCC Commissioner Mesner stated that extraction has shown a, quote, pattern of violations and a negligent approach to best management practices around stormwater management, end of quote. The COGCC fined extraction for this negligence $66,800. The vote from the commission was unanimous. One last point is regarding the FLIR camera that was recently used in videos on 4 extraction well pads here in Windsor area. The Earthworks employee is trained and certified to operate the FLIR 320 camera, which is an approved model by the COGCC as a valid instrument for capturing VOCs. Clearly, it's not just my opinion that this company has disregarded some of the rules with which they portray to be so compliant. If they are to be allowed to operate in Windsor, they should be able to guarantee compliance with every legal safeguard to protect the community. With extraction's track record of spills, leaks, explosions, fires, injuries to contract workers, many complaints by citizens of noise, large truck traffic, strong odors, heavy dust plumes, light pollution, and now a direct violation of COGCC rules, I submit that these 2 projects be rejected at this time until there is proof that extraction can operate in a compliant manner to protect the health and safety of humans and the environment, which is now the law in Colorado. And by the way, the Laku Lake wells, they've been positive for methane for some time. They did do the test run, so just so you know, they do work.
Is there anybody else who wish to come before the board on this agenda item? Does the industry wish to respond to any of the statements just made?
Yeah, Troy Owens, Development Lead for Extraction Oil and Gas. And I'll just bring up real quick about SB 181. Just mention that anything that, during this rulemaking that they come up with, we'll have no problem being fully compliant with all the changes that they make and all the strict rules that they require. And real quick for the Walt well, just to clear up any flaring that was going on there, we actually got a state permit a couple years ago in order to flare that gas because there was no midstream connection up there. And the state has since long stopped permitting any flaring, so none of that will be happening at these 2 sites.
Is there any other questions from the board or anybody else? Mr. Baker.
For Mr. McCarter, I feel like we're in a bit of limbo with our current CUG process versus what we talked about last week. Is there a way to reconcile that, or are you reading my mind about what I'm asking?
I think I understand the question. The question appears to be, if you are considering rules in response to the authority granted to you under Senate Bill 181, how do you deal with an application that has now reached this point? My answer to that is you handle this application under your now existing standards, Because to do otherwise, you're adopting standards on the fly, and the applicant really doesn't know until those things are presented, what standards to meet. And so as a matter of due process, my feeling is that for these pending applications, if you have not either imposed a moratorium, which you haven't, or have not yet adopted new regulations, you fall back on the CUG regulations that are currently in effect in Windsor and that have been described to you by staff on the record tonight. I understand that there are some who believe that Senate Bill 181 requires us to take some kind of regulatory action in response to SB 181. But I don't believe that's the case, and if it is the case, the town has regulations in place that it adopted before Senate Bill 181, and in my view, those are the rules that should apply to this application because we have not adopted any others.
Okay. Okay. With that, I don't see anybody else coming forward. I seek a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Motion on the floor from Mr. Rennemeyer with a second from Mr. Kozlowski to close the public hearing. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. Public hearing is now closed. Moving on to item 5, a conditional use grant to allow oil and gas facilities for the Windsor North Annex Gomer pad. Quasi-judicial action. We've heard from Ms. Malone. Do you have anything further to add for the record?
Nothing further to add.
We have everything we need for the record, Mr. McCarger, to make this consideration?
I believe so.
Okay. Is there anything further from the applicant for the record? Okay. Seeing none, is there a motion?
Madam Mayor, I would move to approve conditional use grant to allow oil and gas facilities on the Gomer pad.
Second.
Motion on the floor from Mr. Rennemeyer with a second from Mr. Kozlowski approving the conditional use grant for the Windsor North Annex Gomer pad. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. And the conditional use grant passes with 4-2 vote. The nays being Baker Wilson and the yeas being Bennett, Melendez, Rennemeyer, and Kozlowski. Moving on to item 6, public hearing for a conditional use grant to allow oil and gas facilities, the Windsor North Annex, now the Otis pad. Ms. Malone.
Perhaps, excuse me, Madam Mayor, if Mr. Kozlowski did not intend to make his earlier disclaimer applicable to this, I would ask that he be given an opportunity to do so.
Well, I need to seek a motion anyway to open this public hearing.
Madam Mayor, I move that we open the public hearing.
Second.
Motion on the floor from Mr. Rennemeyer with a second from Mr. Kozlowski to open public hearing. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. No. Public hearing is now open. Mr. Kozlowski, do you want to read?
Yes, I should, and thank you, Mr. McCarter. I kind of on purpose felt, given these particular matters, I would individually read the disclaimers. So, Madam Mayor, for the record, I want to point out that in my capacity as Town Board Liaison to the Planning Commission, I was present at the Planning Commission meeting during this matter was previously presented. Wish to state my participation in the Planning Commission proceeding had in no way influenced me in my capacity as a town board member this evening. I'll make my decision, cast my vote this evening based solely on the evidence presented during this public hearing. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, now Ms. Malone.
Thank you, Mayor and board members. This proposal is for the Otis pad. This is on the same property, just southeast. Just like the past application, this application was reviewed with Article 7, Chapter 16 in the Municipal Code concerning conditional use grants with specific criteria for oil and gas facilities, those being visual, landscape, and floodplain requirements. Additionally, the town's standard conditions of approval. 1 second here. Okay, this is the correct site. So it is west of State Highway 257 and north of Harmony Road, County Road 74. The site is zoned general commercial. And this site would have the same proposed truck route. As you heard from the applicant earlier, that the alternative route could be changed to the primary route. This site also has 18 wells with associated equipment. There are less residential structures in vicinity to this site. The overall parcel has 79 acres, and this pad site would be close to 15 acres. The distance from the property boundary to the closest occupied structures are 582 feet to the west and 728 feet to the southwest. This proposal also had a neighborhood meeting held on January 10th of this year. Most of the concerns during that meeting pertain to the previous application because of the proximity to the neighborhood and Weld County Road 76. At the August 7th, 2019 meeting, the Planning Commission forwarded to the Town Board a recommendation of approval of the conditional use grant subject to site-specific conditions and the town's conditions of approval for oil and gas facilities as amended. The specific conditions for this site are identical to the one prior, that the truck hauling route remain in accordance with the truck route as shown, given the exception of the primary route versus alternative route. The truck hauling periods avoiding school traffic times and peak times for commuter traffic, and then that the berms and native seeding completion no later than 90 days after production has begun on the pad. And then additionally, the town's standard conditions of approval for oil and gas facilities. Staff would like to enter into the record the application, supplemental materials, staff memorandum, supporting documents, testimony from the public hearing, and the recommendation. And that concludes my information. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay. Did staff have a further presentation with regards to this as well, or is it same as what we saw previously?
The applicant.
The applicant.
Troy Owens, Extraction Oil and Gas, and we have like 2 or 3 slides just showing what this pad looks like, but otherwise it's
Okay,
the exact same.
why don't you go ahead and if you want to make your presentation, give it on that back end of her before we start taking questions and comments. We'll do it in a little bit different order this time.
All right, so pretty much the same presentation as the last one. It has the same traffic route that we showed before. The Gomer and Otis share the same route, and no problem switching to the alternate route for the primary. For the drilling pad for the Otis, it's going to be about 15 acres. We're going to have sound walls on the west side, south side, and east side. And for these, it's to help mitigate any sound. This was from a third-party sound study, as well as mitigate as much visual as we can. And here's a quick picture of what the final facility will look like. And this is where it gets a little different from the Gomer pad. Here, we will have a 4-foot berm going around the southwest and north side, which are the closest structures, in order to screen them. And we will also, on top of that 4-foot berm, put a 6-foot fence on top of it to help further screen any visuals that these nearby houses can see. And this final drawing is just something that we had surveyed in, which shows the line of sight from the 4 closest structures to what the final facility will look like. And since all those structures are already at a lower elevation, the added screening and fence helps shield all of the equipment. And also on this exhibit, it is a 9-foot berm that is shown, but we'll actually have 10 feet of screening. And so, yeah, the entire facility will be hidden from those on the west, except for 1 or 2 ECDs, which are a little taller than the tanks. But besides that, that is all I had on this pad.
Okay. Are there any questions from town board for either the applicant, or for Ms. Malone? Mr. Sosowski.
Thank you, Mayor. And it's not, sorry, not question so much for the applicant, but Mr. McCarger, certainly the rest of his presentation is duplicated in this, selection of president in this particular matter. But I'm assuming we can more or less, it is part of the packet, it is part of the hearing and the application, correct?
That's correct, and I assume that Mr. Owens accepts that the town board can consider what's in your packet materials as well as anything else that's been presented on the record tonight.
Thank you. Just confirm.
Okay. Mr.
I
Bennett.
do have questions. And this is going to feel a little strange because a lot of my questions are going to be the same, some a little different, but it's a separate CUG. It's a separate hearing, so I'm going to continue. This land is zoned general commercial, so this may not be a question for you, it may be more for staff. Do we know if an oil and gas operation has any type of a negative impact on our ability to recruit businesses in a general commercial land zoning?
Let me respond to that just from a legal perspective.
Okay.
Because the impact on potential future commercial users is not one of the criteria for the approval of an oil and gas CUG, I suggest that the answer probably is, I don't want to say irrelevant, but probably shouldn't be considered.
Want to withdraw the question?
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Attorney. Okay. Talk a little bit more about the noise thing. I believe that I heard previously that the state does have a limit of decibels. Is that correct? Would you repeat again on how we as a town would know if those levels are being exceeded?
Yeah, so we do a baseline sound monitoring just to determine what's there. And if, as we start drilling and producing, we have people there 24/7, and we hear if there's any complaints or anything during the drilling, completion, construction phases, then we go out there with handheld sound monitors, try to get as close as to where the complaint was originating from, see to verify that we're out of compliance or anything like that, and then we go back to the site. Even if we're not out of compliance, we'll do everything we can on the site to help mitigate sound even further, whether it's install additional sound walls or hay bales, or try to shield specific equipment or shift stuff around, things like that.
So this is based on if you get a complaint, then you check.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. How would the town know?
The town?
Yeah, how would the town know if?
I don't think we are required to let the town know, but our community manager might know a little better than me on this one.
If complaints are received, there's no policy or process in place right now to notify the LGD. However, that is something we would be receptive to. We do, as a part of the modeling that Troy was mentioning, we do model the equipment that's going to be out there during drilling, and during completion. So from that, we know what the noise level should be in various locations. And so when I get a call from a resident with complaints, first thing we do is kind of identify where they're at in proximity to the location. And then I work with our environmental team to go out and identify what the possible sources are. We get as much information from the resident as possible, as far as the time of day, a description of what that sound is, and then we start doing our mitigation regardless of the level of sound, whether it be compliant or not. Of course, we're more concerned if there's some out of compliance issues, but even if we're below compliance levels, we're concerned if a neighbor is feeling nuisance from our operations.
And I appreciate our attorney. I don't believe we can add conditions. And it'd be inappropriate to do that, I agree. But I would like to request that if there are complaints, the town is somehow notified of that.
Absolutely.
Okay. Air quality. Again, what is your process procedure for monitoring air quality? And how does the town know if limits are being exceeded?
Kelly, Joanna.
Yeah, currently, I mean, so the notion there that there is some sort of alarm and that we would notify the town. Those are instances that are much more extreme than a normal leak that's found in a leak detection program. So just making sure there's some differences between leak detection, small leaks, and then like large events, emergency response. They're different levels of alarmism, is all I'm saying. So you asked when the town would be notified.
What is your process for knowing that there might be emissions above the acceptable levels, and how would we be notified? And that's, I know there's different levels. There's a minor leak, there could be a major leak, there, you know, but
So when you say acceptable levels right now.
There's always gonna be some emissions. It's never gonna be 100% clean.
Right.
Okay, so, but there's certain levels of emissions that are deemed to be acceptable. Okay.
Well, to me, that's
So-
permitted.
Permitted, okay, so if it's above that, how do you know that, and how would we know?
Well, we are not allowed to operate above our permitted
Okay.
thresholds.
Okay,
So we do not operate above our permitted thresholds.
but if
So,
something happens.
and it's very difficult to talk about permitted thresholds versus leaks, or public exposure leaks. So when I permit facility emissions, we talk about VOCs. When people talk about public exposure, they bring up the word methane. But methane is not a VOC, and so therefore not a permitted pollutant. So it gets really hard to talk about the two different worlds. But from your perspective, I feel like you're always talking about it from a public perspective, public exposure.
Right.
That's where you're interested. Right now, Extraction is doing a lot of work to try and understand how we can better communicate what the public is exposed to, because at the end of the day, we know we keep saying, well, this is what we're permitted to emit. We're permitted to emit this much, and that becomes a difficult conversation all the time because we're always just on opposite ends. What I can commit to you is that we're trying these sensors out that everybody is talking about. We're working with the CDPHE and the CAMEL when they're around, or available or have power around our pads to collect really good data. We're taking opportunities that we can to collect that kind of data and evaluate that kind of equipment. But otherwise, we rely a lot on our inspections to kind of alarm us of anything wrong that's minor on a pad. Things that are much more major that I would be concerned about public exposure are going to alarm from things like automation or something much more, not relying on a human's perspective to trigger on.
Okay, thank you.
But we do it, in terms of inspections, I would go back to the same answer of like, we do our AVO inspections, which we're required to do daily. These facilities will be manned 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. When they first turn on, we'll do our required LDAR inspections, which will be monthly for, like we've said, for the first few years. And we train our people constantly to walk around a facility, making sure they're clean, smelling for things and hearing for things.
Suspend other questions.
No, I mean, if you have them, please ask them, otherwise we need to bring it out to the public. I don't think the board has any additional questions.
Again, it feels redundant, but this is two separate things, so follow please. Water quality, how is that being monitored, and how is it being reported, and how would the town know if there's something that's inappropriate?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what Joanna said last time.
All right, I'm here again. Hi, Joanna Ostrom, Regulatory Manager. So I'll speak to, again, the COGCC regulations that we all comply with. So there's baseline water quality testing that we do prior to any activity on the pad. We test 2 wells within a half-mile radius of the pad. We do a baseline water quality test to determine, just the quality of the water within the well before we show up. And then post hydraulic fracturing, we'd take another sample of these exact same wells to see if there was any issues. That's all reported to the COGCC. All that data is public, available to town LGDs, local government designees that work with the COGCC. So all that information is publicly available.
How often is that available?
It's on their website, so.
It's on the website?
Yes, I believe so. I can supply that information too after this too.
I can get that. Okay, and also this is last series of questions from me. This is still in general commercial, so at some point we would hope that there's retail or commercial activity there. Talk about what changes you might make either now or in the future dealing with lighting, fencing, aesthetics that would encourage commercial development or retail development there.
Yeah.
Or not prohibit it.
Like the previous pad, work with the landowner. It's the same landowner as the Gomer pad, and try to work together with if they want to put in any fencing or additional berming or landscaping, anything like that. It's kind of up to them and their court or the developers. And we work with developers in other communities all the time to update and upgrade pads as they start bringing in new construction around it.
And my understanding is that that would be a different process. That would be a process brought to us by the developer at that point.
Under the subdivision process, yes, sir.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Does that complete your questions? Okay. Any additional questions from town board? Okay, this is the public hearing component, so if there's anybody in the chambers who wish to speak to the board on this conditional use grant, now would be the time to come forward.
I have a question regarding the wells that were tested. I'm in town and I do in fact have a well. I didn't actually give my address that they could check the well, and they just said they only test 2 wells. I'd like to know where that went and why my well was never tested. And if they're only allowed 2, I don't know very many people in town who have wells. I'd like to know who else within my area was tested. And I'm at 224 North 6th.
I believe what they were stating is they draw these wells on their site. Is that not from the applicant? I mean, you don't just go around testing wells already in place. You want to?
Yeah, they actually did go around saying that they will test the wells. So I gave my name and I said, I'm going to be within a certain radius of wherever it was. And that's why I'm curious, because it sounds like it was actually reduced down to 2 wells within a certain area. And I just want to know how that was established, because particularly me being by the lake, it'd be kind of nice to know.
Okay, it looks like somebody's prepared to answer your question.
Okay, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. So we send out notices to folks about water wells. There's the 2 is what's required by the COGCC, but that's what we do when we get permission. However, we're willing to test additional water well owners if that's something, we're willing to do that, to test prior to development for this gentleman.
Okay.
And that's why I brought this up, is because what I was told is they wanted to do it beforehand, and now that all the wells have already been drilled, or the majority of them, that now they're not going to have a baseline. And that's why I was trying to figure out why I was missed and why. You know what I'm saying? Is because now it may be redundant. And again, I will put my name forward because I'm kind of curious. But again, it just seemed kind of odd that we're talking about this, and I really don't know too many people in town who have wells, but I'm kind of curious, and I'd like to get it tested.
Okay, maybe you can leave your name with these folks before you leave this evening. Yes, please come forward.
Wanted to clarify. So there's some value to having proximity to the well location. These wells that haven't been drilled yet, obviously we're trying to get a conditional use grant, so I'm not sure exactly what wells he's referencing that have already been drilled. Also, it has to be a permitted well. It can't just be somebody decided to drill, a hand drill a well or something. So it has to be a permitted water well with the, I forget which state agency it is. So anyway, I can reference him. I just want to add those two comments, and there needs to be proximity to where we're going to drill within a half mile, and then want to make sure it's registered. But we'll contact this gentleman. Thank you.
Okay. Very much. Is there anybody else? Yep, please step forward.
I'm Diane West, address on record, as I still have continuing concerns about whether this is even appropriate for conditional use grant, especially with the Senate bill giving us permission to be concerned about our health. Before, this town would always hide behind, say, well, we have to go by the regulations, or, we'll get sued. Well, now the regulations have changed, and now you're still saying, oh, well, we're not required to worry about the health of the people. That's pretty much what the attorney advised, that we can just go by whatever we want. Well, I think that the citizens of Windsor need to be protected, and we need people that represent us that will protect us. And during the flow back, which is people do not know this, during the flow back when the oil starts to come flow, that's when it's the most dangerous levels of air toxics and VOCs. And I don't think probably one time has that been tested in the Windsor, Weld County area. And then now after all this time of me speaking before the town for years about my concerns, then I kept always bringing up the flow back period, which is a known time of very dangerous air toxics. And then there was some old law in the book saying the oil and gas didn't have to follow any rules for 90 days once they started drilling. Well, that just came out not too long before this Senate Bill 181. So now that should be off the books now that you can care about our health and our water and our environment. And once the water does get, this water that they're testing with wells, that's fine and dandy, but there's groundwater that can get polluted. There's aquifers that spread. Once one part of the aquifer gets polluted, it's going to spread to the other. It's going to affect other properties and the groundwater and the other wells, not just near their properties. It could spread. And I've seen water burn come out of a dairy farmer's well from exposure to this. They've turned on their faucet, put it in a pitcher and lit a match to it, and I've witnessed that. So I know what can happen. And I also personally experienced driving by Milkshake well pad, going to my mom's hospital in Loveland. It was late, it was almost getting dark, there was some oil people kind of digging around there, and I smelled the sweet smell of benzene. So I'm sure I was exposed at high levels of benzene. And that was about the time, actually, of the Stromberger explosion. It was in close proximity to the same time of the explosion and fire of the Stromberger well. And I don't know where their remote and all their backup systems were when the explosion happened at the Stromberger well. Thank you.
Okay. Last call. Last call for anybody who wanted to come forward. Okay, I seek a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved. Second.
Motion on the floor from Mr. Kozlowski with a second from Mr. Redemeyer to close the public hearing. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. Public hearing is now closed. Moving.
Is it appropriate to make a comment before we vote?
We can when we get on to item
Okay,
7, yes.
okay, if it's not, that's
Item 7, conditional use grant to allow for oil and gas facilities on the Otis pad, quasi-judicial action. Ms. Malone, anything further to add for the record?
Nothing further. Thank you.
Okay. Do we need Mr. Kozlowski to read his statement again, or it qualifies at the beginning of the public hearing?
Nope, we got that done. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Bennett.
Yeah, I was asking a lot of questions tonight because I was listening for a number of things. There are a number of safety procedures in the industry, and I want that to come out. I also, in my view, there are some gaps in our CUG process. There's some things I think we ought to be requiring, and that's another reason I was asking the type of questions I was. I'm going to be voting yes, because even though I think there's some things I'd like to see beefed up in the CUGs, I think it's inappropriate, given that we haven't changed our conditions to, in midstream like this, to spring them out now. So that's why I'm voting yes, but I do want to make the point that there are a lot of safety procedures already in place that are impressive. It's to the industry's benefit to be as safe and transparent as possible, but I also think there's some things that we could do that would make it even better for our community. So that's my little speech. Thank you.
Mr. Baker.
Yeah, thank you, and I'm going to agree with Mr. Bennett. I think our CUG process needs to be beefed up, as we discussed last week. I guess I'm going to contradict myself. I'm going to vote yes because I don't believe this is compatible with residential, and this is not in a residential zone, and they've met the other conditions of our CUG, so I will support this.
Okay, anybody else? Mr.
Yes.
Kozlowski.
Thank you, Mayor. Really just want to comment and mirror what Mr. McCarter kind of advised us all in terms of the scope of our review and consideration tonight in keeping with the existing CUG requirements. And to some extent, and Mr. Bennett, I appreciate you, I guess, extracting, if you will, the information relating to many of the safety concerns. And I echo, and I certainly appreciate the responses you got and the level of thoroughness that was evidenced. But to an extent, and much of that is not necessarily relevant to our existing CUG criteria. And certainly I'll be voting yes again on that basis primarily.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, I'm going to make a comment as well. So last week at our work session, we heard from experts in the industry. We heard from KOGA and the Colorado Department of Health. They told us the levels of emissions and these gases that were provided in terms of testimony before us were taken out of context and could not be connected to the industry. Also said that even with the current 500 setback, and I believe the setbacks we're looking back at on both of these CUGs are farther than 500, we're at very low risk, is how they determined them. So tonight, I too am going to vote yes in favor of the CUG. We do not need Senate Bill 181 to dictate how we respond. Our charter, when we become elected officials, by our charter says that we stand for the health, safety, and welfare of our citizens. And I believe that myself, in the 10 years that I have been on this board, and I will affirm all my fellow board members that we have acted every single time on every single issue what is in the best health, safety, and welfare for our citizens. So I too will be voting yes on this this evening, and I would seek a motion.
Madam Mayor, I move that we approve conditional use grant to allow for oil and gas facilities on the Otis PAD.
Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion on the floor from Mr. Rennemeyer with a second from Mr. Kozlowski, voting for the yes, vote yes on the conditional use grant if you approve and no if you do not. It's on. My light is on.
I'm going to clear the voting and have one more vote taken.
Ready?
And the conditional use grant passes on a 5-1 vote, the nays being Mr. Wilson, the yeas being Baker, Bennett, Melendez, Rennemeyer, and Kozlowski. Moving on to item 8, our finance report for June 2019. Mr. Moyer.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. You'll see in your packet that we have both the June and the May report in the packet. I'm just going to speak to the June report, being that it's halfway through the year and it's a pretty important benchmark as we go through the year. So the biggest news is that, as I mentioned, we want 50% of our revenue as a benchmark by this time of year. In our three largest tax collections, we have covered 50% already this year. The biggest one being the construction use tax generated from the large number of building permits that we have this year. So we are okay on that, on those collections. The one thing that I will point out is the sales tax for June was just a tad below the requirement for June. That rebounded in July, so by the end of July, we are going where we should be. So, of course, our sales tax, as I've said a number of times, is driven, our biggest driver is grocery and convenience stores, and that continues to be the case. For the expenditures, again with the 50% benchmark, we have our O&M operations expenditures are at 40%, capital at 13.5%, so combine those, we're at 28.13. So just to wrap it up, we are ahead on the revenue versus the expenditures, and we are at a good spot here for being halfway through the year. With, as we've talked, we are having an exceptional year in building permits and construction use tax. So that being said, I would answer any questions, but that is my report for June.
Okay.
Looks like I cleared out the room.
Thank you. Thank you for helping us end on a positive note. Is there questions for Mr. Moyer? Mr. Kozlowski?
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Moyer, I'm just looking at that year-over-year sales tax comparison by your geocode. Thank you for doing that. I really, that sheds a lot of light on that. Just curious, on Bruner Farms is the one that shows a negative 32%. I'm curious what businesses or sales tax collections.
I wrote that down here once, and now I can't remember exactly where Bruner Farms is.
That's
New Windsor? The east side of Jacoby Farms. Okay.
Yeah, what business would be there that would collect?
Whoever
they are, darn it, they're down 32%.
Yeah, I'll instead of just guessing, is it okay if I look it up and
Yes, sir.
and get back with you tomorrow?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Any other, Mr.
Do you have more?
Did you have
No,
additional
I'm good.
question? Okay, Mr. Beck.
Go ahead and guess. On the first page, it talks about year-to-date, the town has issued 457 licenses, 76% which have been retail.
Yes.
Do you just enjoy, are a lot of those renewals or are those new?
A lot of them are renewals. Since we started, usually, we used to do it on a calendar year basis, but we changed that here earlier this year, so it just keeps rolling like that.
So most of that's probably renewals.
Yes, we have issued quite a few new ones, but not 475.
I didn't think so.
Yeah.
That's not the answer I wanted to hear, but no.
Anything else?
No.
Anything else?
No, ma'am,
Thank you for your report.
Thank you.
Move on to communications. Communications from our town attorney.
Just a quick one for all of you. We're looking to September 9th and September 23rd for first and second reading of an ordinance that would approve two metropolitan districts for the sports park area. So our special counsel for special districts has been reviewing their submittals. They just yesterday submitted the complete package because they were kind of giving it to us in an incomplete form. So we are going over that. We are trying to get them set for approval in September so that they can meet November election deadlines. I am confident we'll be able to sort all of that out. So expect to see a commercial metro district before you in a month or so. That's all I've got for now. Thank you.
Okay. underneath this communications from town staff, I mean, we have in our packet, I don't think we need, unless there was something specific that we wanted to call out for the finance report from May and the site plan review, but just note that those are in your packet, right? Any additional communications, Mr. Balstead? No communications. Mr. Lucas?
Thank you, Mayor and Board. Appreciate your time at the work session tonight. I wanted to remind you that we have the last 2 concerts coming up next couple of Thursdays. Winefest is this weekend in Main Park, so there'll be a lot of folks around that area. And then in a few weeks, Harvest Festival is coming. So summer's coming to an end, but obviously our special event season is not. So look forward to hopefully seeing you all this weekend. Thanks.
Okay. Mr. Thornhill?
I guess I'll come up here. Mr. Bennett did mention that the Water and Sewer Board is going on a non-pot tour on Wednesday, and they wanted to extend the invitation to the town board as well. So
That's this Wednesday?
This Wednesday at 6:30 a.m.
What time was that again?
6:30.
Dark 30. Dark 30.
A.m.?
I will be somewhere else at 6:30 a.m. And it's not my bed either, but it is something else, another meeting already, sorry. Mr. Moyer, did you want to add anything further?
Yes, well, I have an answer for.
Oh, great. You're speedy.
I was looking at, I'll wait till I get up here. If you look at the graph at Brunner Farms here, you can see the blue line is larger than the red line. The blue is the 2019. I think the minus 32% is a typo, I think. But I'm almost sure it's a typo. And then as far as the businesses that are in that geocode, that covers like the Walgreens and what's that tire place up there, and the and the auto parts store there. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Great,
Thank you. That answer your question.
Finest in blue there?
No, nothing.
Okay. Okay, communications from town manager.
Just a reminder that we have 2 executive sessions to follow this evening, and we will be meeting in the second floor conference room.
Okay. Communications from town board. I just have 2 items. One is Coffee with the Mayor is this Saturday at the Coffee House 29. My guest is Eric Lucas, going to be talking about Parks and Rec and like probably the strategic plan a little bit and what we have coming forward. So hope you will join us there from 7:30 to 9. Severance Days has their stuff going on from 10 to 2, and then along with Winefest happening from whatever time they start, 11 to 5. And then we do have scheduled next Monday, the mill tour starting at 5 o'clock. So for those who are interested, meet at the mill. Where should we meet? Here or at the mill?
Right, well, it's I think we need to post it, but I think you could meet at the mill.
Okay. And then we'll plan on either walking back or driving back here then for our work session. following.
Sorry, Mayor, that was the 19th then?
That is the 19th.
Okay.
If it's posted, we'll see.
That's true.
Okay?
And so,
with the-
Your Honor, I'm
Yes.
sorry, so should we just say, do you think that tour is going to be about 30 minutes for the mill? Does that sound right?
Yeah, I don't know how much more they've gotten accomplished, but yeah, I mean, what were we scheduled to meet next Monday? Was it 6 o'clock?
I think it would be 6, but I just wonder if you're going to meet at the mill and do a tour, if we'd be a little bit more expeditious to maybe schedule 5:30, 5:45, maybe plan on having something to eat here, because again, if everybody goes right after work and does a tour,
Okay.
you know, so I think we were planning on 6, but we
Okay,
can
yeah,
maybe.
Steve wanted to do it right at 5, so, I mean, it could take longer, I mean, especially if last time we were in there, we couldn't get up the stairs, but I'm sure we can get up the stairs now, so. And there's probably a lot more to see, I'm guessing, since we're about a month away from opening day. I mean, planning, have you heard anything different? Do we know? Is it still looking like October-ish? Okay, yeah, so I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
So we can plan on utilizing our time, going there and then being able to come back and get to business.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm lost. 5, 6?
Mail tour at 5, but we will immediately start or come back, have a light dinner, and then start our work session. So we might start it earlier than normal.
Yeah, I may schedule it at 5:45. That'll give us time to get back here, get our plates, and get going. I just didn't want everybody to come back and be starving, sitting around for 30 minutes waiting.
I totally agree. I just heard 5, 5:30, 5:45, 6.
You just want to make sure we're going to feed you. Yes, sir, we've got that.
No one wanted to know where to be.
He wants to sleep.
Okay, with that, I would seek a motion next to move into executive session.
Madam Mayor, I move that we move into executive session pursuant to Colorado Revised Statute 24-6-402, subsection 4E and I, for the purpose of determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, developing strategy for negotiations, and instructing negotiators with respect to raw water dedications. I also move for a second executive session pursuant to Colorado Revised Statute 24-6-402, subsection 4 and B, to confer with the town attorney for purposes of receiving legal advice on specific legal questions concerning raw water dedications.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion on the floor and a second.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Kozlowski.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, I just want, I will be voting in favor of going into executive session, but I do need to disclose that it's my understanding that the subject matter is, of the executive session may include negotiation strategy and legal matters involving an entity with which I have a supervisory relationship, and I believe it would be improper for me to participate in that executive session. So I'm going to recuse myself, and after voting in favor of session, of course, we'll allow the rest of the board to proceed without me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And with that, we have a motion on the floor and a second. All those in favor of moving into executive session, vote yes. Opposed, no. And the motion passes unanimously. We'll take about a 10-minute recess to collect our things and then move downstairs, say goodbyes, farewells to Mr. Kozlowski.
I should recuse myself a little bit more.